Let me start with the contradiction because that is where the story always begins. Donald Trump is telling the world that Iran wants to make a deal, that the war is essentially over, that he's doing a great job, that it's wrapping up, that we're close, very close to an agreement. He said it this morning. He's been saying versions of it for days. And at the same time, at the exact same time, the United States is sending the George H.W. Bush carrier strike group to the Middle East. Thousands of additional American troops moving forces into the region, and the United States has imposed a blockade on the Persian Gulf. Now, I need you to sit with that contradiction for a moment because it is not accidental and it is not just messaging confusion. It is the signature of a leadership that is stuck. When the words say de-escalation and the forces say escalation, you follow the forces, always. I've been saying this for weeks. Don't track the tweets, don't track the press conferences. Track the movement of forces. That is the real data. And the real data right now says escalation. Let me explain exactly what's happening and why it matters, because each of these moving pieces connects to the others in ways that I think most people aren't seeing clearly yet. Start with the blockade. The United States has put in place a blockade of the Persian Gulf, ostensibly to pry open the Strait of Hormuz. Now think about that strategically for a moment. Think about that as a negotiating tool. The idea, presumably, is that by blockading the Gulf, you create pressure on Iran to come to the table and agree to open Hormuz on American terms. That's the theory. Here's the problem. Iran's response has been immediate and public and entirely predictable to anyone who has studied how states respond to military coercion. The commander of Iran's military stated, and I'm going to give you the substance of this because it matters, "We will not allow any export or import activity in the Gulf and the Sea of Oman if the American blockade continues. Our armed forces will not allow trade to flow through the Red Sea if the naval blockade continues. If America continues its naval blockade, this will be considered a prelude to violating the ceasefire." You see what's happening? Iran is not folding. Iran is escalating horizontally. This is exactly the pattern I described to you in my foreign affairs piece. Stage 2 of the escalation trap is horizontal escalation. The targeted state doesn't go toe-to-toe with American military power because they know they can't win that fight. Instead, they expand the battlefield. They take the conflict somewhere else where American power has limits. And where does American power have limits right now? The Red Sea, the Houthis in Yemen. That is Iran's lever. And they are not being subtle about it. They are saying it publicly. In plain language, you keep this blockade running, we activate the Red Sea. We shut down commerce there. Oil prices go through the roof. The global economy feels it. And your coalition partners, the Gulf states, the Europeans, the Asians who depend on that shipping, they start calling Washington and they start asking questions. This is not improvisation on Iran's part. This is a strategy. And I want to be direct about something here. It is a strategy that is working. When I look at the behavior of ships in the Strait of Hormuz right now, what I see is not a blockade succeeding. I see a blockade being tested and in many cases being ignored. Tankers are getting warnings from U.S. ships. They are acknowledging the warnings, and then they are sailing right through anyway. Signals on, not hiding, just ignoring the United States Navy. Iranian supertankers getting through. Chinese-backed vessels getting through. The blockade, in practical terms, is leaking. And a leaking blockade is in some ways worse than no blockade at all because it demonstrates the limits of American power without achieving the strategic objective. It shows everyone who is watching, and everyone is watching, that the United States cannot actually enforce its own declared policy in this waterway. Now here's the part that I find particularly telling. The George H.W. Bush Carrier Strike Group, thousands of sailors, the most powerful conventional naval platform in the world, is not traveling to the Middle East through the Red Sea. It is taking the long route, down past Africa, around the Cape, the long way. And why? Because the Houthis in Yemen, a non-state actor, a proxy of Iran with drones and missiles, have made the Red Sea too dangerous for the United States Navy to transit comfortably. Think about what that signal sends. If you are a commercial shipping company, if you are a tanker captain, if you are a cargo operator trying to decide whether to risk the Strait of Hormuz, and you see that the United States Carrier Strike Group is going around Africa to avoid Iran's proxies, what does that tell you? It tells you the American guarantee of safe passage is not what it was, and that uncertainty, that doubt, is itself a form of Iranian strategic victory. You see, let me come to the Trump statements themselves, because I think they deserve serious analysis rather than just dismissal, even when they are, and I'll be diplomatic here, even when they are strategically incoherent. Trump said this morning on Fox News, and I'm giving you the substance. I had to go and fight. I had no choice. If I didn't do it, Iran would have had a nuclear weapon. And if they had a nuclear weapon, you would be calling everybody over there. He then said that Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, countries that were hit by Iranian retaliation, were shocked. Shocked, he said, that Iran attacked them. Now I have to stop there, because that claim is not supported by the record. Those countries were not shocked. They warned us. They told the Trump administration repeatedly what was going to happen if the bombing campaign began. The Gulf states knew. Oman's mediators knew. There were active negotiations underway, a settlement discussion, and according to reporting the Omani mediator, a neutral third party that the United States itself chose, indicated that a framework had essentially been reached for Iran to stop enriching uranium. That was the moment, apparently, when the U.S. chose to proceed with the military operation. And every one of those Gulf state governments that Trump is now saying was shocked. They had been trying to tell Washington that this was coming. They were not shocked, they were ignored. And this matters because it goes to the fundamental question of whether there is a coherent strategy here. I've been advising military and government institutions for decades. I've sat in rooms where strategy is made. And what I'm seeing from the outside right now does not look like strategy. It looks like what I would call the chaos approach. Move fast, create disruption, trust that something will shake loose in your favor. That can work in business negotiations. It can work in media cycles. It does not work when the other side has 1 million men in arms, deeply buried arsenals, proxy networks across the region, and a supreme leader who needs to demonstrate toughness to his own power base. The chaos approach runs into a wall when the other side has more tolerance for chaos than you do. And right now, Iran has more tolerance for chaos than we do. That is the uncomfortable reality. Trump also told Maria Bartiromo this morning that he wants to rename the Strait of Hormuz the Trump Strait. He acknowledged that Italy has pulled back. She's been negative, he said of Prime Minister Meloni, referring to anyone who wouldn't support the Iran operation as no longer having the same relationship with the United States. He said Europe forming its own plans to open Hormuz without the U.S. And I want to quote his exact framing here because it reveals something. He said, "Oh, they're so sad. We're doing it now." Without the United States just shows you how can you have a country, how can you have a group of countries with that attitude. I want to address that directly because that framing is exactly backwards. Europe forming a plan to open Hormuz without the United States is not sad. It is a rational response to American unreliability. If your security guarantor is behaving erratically, you build redundancy. You develop alternatives. You stop depending on a single point of failure. That is not weakness. That is strategic prudence. And the fact that Trump reads European strategic autonomy as ingratitude tells you something important about how this administration understands alliances, which is to say, it doesn't really understand alliances at all. Alliances are not tribute relationships. They are not arrangements where smaller powers express gratitude to a patron. They are mutual security arrangements that function because all parties calculate they're better off inside than outside. The moment the patron becomes unpredictable, the calculation changes. And right now, the calculation is changing across Europe, across the Gulf, across Asia. Now, Iran's social media has been running a mocking campaign directed at Trump. Images of him as a baby with a video game controller playing a game called Hormuz Strait. their response to his posts, their official state accounts posting things like trapped in a ditch and still digging deeper. I don't usually spend time on social media taunting in strategic analysis. But here I'll make an exception, because it does tell you something. It tells you how Iran is reading the situation. And what they are reading is weakness, not strength, pretending to be weakness, not a sophisticated feint, actual weakness. They have analyzed the pattern of American behavior over these weeks, the contradictory statements, the carrier group going around Africa, the blockade being ignored, the constant pivoting between deal language and war language, and their assessment is that the United States is not operating from a position of coherent strength, and their public mockery is partly for domestic consumption, partly for regional signaling to the Gulf states, and partly a deliberate provocation designed to see how Trump responds, because how he responds tells them how much room they have. And then there's the China dimension, because Trump also told Baromo this morning that Xi Jinping wrote him a beautiful letter saying China is not sending weapons to Iran. And Trump said he's looking forward to getting a big fat hug from Xi when he visits in a few weeks. Now, I've spent time in China recently. I visited Wuhan, Shenzhen, the advanced industrial centers. I've seen what China is building, and I want to be very precise. China is not making strategic decisions about Iran, about the Strait of Hormuz, about the regional balance of power based on personal warmth toward Donald Trump. They are making calculations based on their national interest. And their national interest right now, let me be direct, is served by America being bogged down, by America burning through its standoff precision munitions, by America's alliances fraying, by America's credibility taking hits across the Gulf. A beautiful letter costs China nothing. And as long as America is the one absorbing the strategic costs of this conflict, China is watching and building and winning without firing a single shot. That is what I saw when I was in those factories. That is what I see when I look at the realignment happening in the Gulf right now. Xi Jinping does not need to fight America. He just needs America to keep fighting everyone else. So let me bring this all together, because here is the strategic picture as I see it right now. We have a blockade that is leaking and that has prompted Iran to threaten the Red Sea as a counter lever. We have a carrier strike group that cannot transit the Red Sea, which is itself a message about the limits of American power projection. We have Gulf state governments, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, that were not shocked by Iranian retaliation, were in fact warning us it was coming, and are now quietly exploring their options. We have Europe building a parallel security architecture. We have China watching and accumulating advantage, and we have a president saying the war is almost over while simultaneously surging forces into the region. The war is not almost over. I want to be direct about that, because the data does not support that conclusion. The enriched uranium material, the actual strategic objective of this entire campaign, we still don't know where it is. That was the problem in June. It was the problem in February. And it is the problem right now. Everything else, the leadership decapitation, the bombing of facilities, the blockade, none of it addresses that core problem. We still don't have the gold. We destroyed the pan, we may have shaken the riverbed, but the gold is somewhere we can't see, and it may be dispersing further every day. And the longer we stay in this posture, blockade in place, forces building up, talks happening and collapsing and happening again, Iran expanding its horizontal escalation, the more we are drifting toward stage 3, toward the ground option. I said it was more likely than not we'd get there. Every day that goes by without a serious deal, every additional troop deployment, every carrier strike group that heads to the region is a data point that moves us closer to that outcome. Here is what I would say to anyone watching this and trying to understand where we are. The contradiction between Trump's words and Trump's actions is not confusion. It is the signature of a leader caught in the escalation trap. He can't say the war is going badly because that is politically costly. He can't say it's going well and stop because the underlying problem, the enriched material, the strait, the nuclear trajectory of a now more aggressive Iranian regime hasn't been resolved. So he does both simultaneously. He declares near victory while sending more troops. He talks deal while tightening the blockade. He says Iran is almost ready to surrender while Iran posts mocking memes from official government accounts. That is not strength. That is not chaos as strategy. That is a leader who is stuck, who knows he is stuck, and who is hoping that something will break his way before the political consequences of being stuck become fully visible. I've seen this before. In Vietnam, Lyndon Johnson kept saying we were close. In Iraq, we were told we'd be greeted as liberators, and when we weren't, the next story was always that we were almost at the turning point. There is always a turning point just around the corner. And round after round, you find that the corner keeps moving. The data points I'm watching, and these are the ones you should watch too, are the movement of forces, the status of the Omani mediation channel, whether Iran's 10-point framework moves at all, and whether those carrier groups come back toward the Gulf or stay 1,000 miles away. If the forces keep building and no deal materializes, we are not watching a war wind down. We are watching a war prepare for its next phase. And that next phase, as I've laid out, carries costs that will be felt not just in the Middle East, but here at home, at the pump, in the bond market, in the fraying of every alliance relationship that took decades to build. The contradiction is the story. And right now, the contradiction is telling us something we need to hear.